Hello and welcome back to TVP World. My name is Alex Solinsky and these are World Talks, where every word matters. Georgia is supposed to elect a new president on December 14th, but the incumbent Salome Zourabichvili, the engine driving opposition protest challenging the legitimacy of the Georgian Dream government, is saying she will not give up her office. For more than 2 weeks now, the country has been rocked by mass protests to which authorities have responded with force. In October, Georgia held parliamentary elections, which domestic and international observers deemed the elections unfree and unfair. This caused the European Parliament to call for new elections under international supervision. And joining us now to discuss this further is Maria Simeonova, head of Sofia office, European Council on Foreign Relations. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
So now, for the first time, Georgia's president will not be elected by the population, but by an electoral college, including 150 deputies of the Georgian parliament, in which the pro-Russian Georgian Dream has a majority. So are these elections, can we call them an election, or is it simply an appointment in a consolidation of power by the Georgian Dream party?
Yes, indeed. And the results of today's vote seem to be predicted already. What we are witnessing is indeed consolidation of power, with fears that this will be consolidation of authoritarian power. So the Georgian streets, the streets of the Georgian cities have been full of protesters, indeed because of these efforts of the ruling Georgian Dream party to consolidate all power possible in the country. At the elections on 26th of October, which, as you said, were marked by irregularities confirmed by international observers, the winner, the Georgian Dream party, with its actions provoked protests, and it then subsequently seized the EU integration path of Georgia. This provoked even bigger protests, and now the last step towards the full consolidation of power is the presidential institution, because as of now, the current president, Salome Zourabichvili, is the only beacon of hope that Georgia will not divert from its European path. And even today, as of the early morning, we saw protesters on the streets. We saw President Zourabichvili joining them. And this is the last effort to basically prevent the full consolidation of power by the Georgian Dream.
So now, since you've mentioned President Salome Zourabichvili, I wanted to ask, how much can she count on the people of Georgia to continue supporting her?
From what we are seeing, the protests were not limited to Tbilisi, just the contrary. From Tbilisi to Kutaisi to Batumi, people of different age were on the streets opposing the Georgian Dream decision to seize the integration process of Georgia, something that is in the constitution of Georgia. So President Zourabichvili has the support of a very pro-European Georgian society. Georgia is the country with the highest share of the society supporting the integration, around 80% of the people. The EU, the image of the EU in Georgia is very high. And this is why the president relies on the Georgian society, which throughout the years has proved many times that it wants its country to become member of the Euro-Atlantic institutions.
So now you've mentioned the EU integration process of Georgia and those high amounts of people who would like to see their country in Georgia. Now, will this, let's say, presidential election, just how much will it test the ties of Georgia with EU?
Well, the ties of Georgia with the EU have started to deteriorate this year with the actions of Georgian Dream, which was ruling even before the October elections, and namely this materialized in laws that were adopted in the first half of the year which unfortunately targeted the rights of representatives of the LGBTQ plus community, but it also targeted the civil society. And therefore, the EU started sending signals earlier this year that the actions of the Georgian government is directly violating human rights. So, in this context, the EU integration process of Georgia was already deteriorating even before the announcement of the Prime Minister Kubahidze to stop or to postpone the EU integration talks with 4 years. And whether it's a test or not, I think it's yet to see from the EU as well how it will react to what's going on in Georgia. We already saw that the Baltic states took it on their own. They imposed travel bans, therefore sanctions on Georgian officials linked to election fraud, but also violation of human rights. And in the next week, with the Foreign Affairs Council meeting and the first council for the High Representative Kaja Kallas, we might see an attempt of the EU to react on this, and we'll see whether the EU will join the US as well, which already 2 days ago sanctioned additional officials who are linked to violations of human rights.
Now, you mentioned this upcoming Monday meeting of the foreign ministers of the EU. So I wanted to ask, what do you expect from that meeting on Monday? Can we expect maybe sanctions on some individuals from Georgia?
This is what many think tankers, the Georgian civil society, Georgian journalists who are currently on the street, this is what they're hoping. The European Parliament was the institution, as you mentioned in your expose, that passed a resolution where it calls for sanctions and it calls for rerunning the October elections once again because they were not free, and therefore the Georgian people deserve another round of election that will be conducted under international observation. So the European Parliament was the institution that within the EU was the first one to act boldly and ask for bold directions by the other institutions of the EU. My expectation is that there's already thinking within the EU on how to react. Apparently, there needs to be find a way that targets only officials that are linked to civil society human rights violations in Georgia, and but also officials who are connected with this violence on the streets that we are seeing. And the EU should be careful not to harm the Georgian people who are on the streets and trying to attract the attention of the international community on what's going on there. So my expectation is that there will be some action, but it should be fast, it should be quick, because already now we're in weeks of protests, and the government is kind of strengthening its grip on the developments in Georgia.
So now I wanted to ask, because you mentioned, of course, the Georgian people who are out there bravely in the streets, I mean, putting their own safety at risk in order to try and fight and draw the attention of, like you said, the other European Union countries. I mean, and you also mentioned, if I remember correctly, about 80% of citizens would like to see Georgia in the EU. Now, and I would like you to explain to our viewers, why are these people, why are they so passionate about this fight? What would life for them look like if Georgia were to be drawn into Russia's sphere and orbit of influence?
We are seeing that the Georgian Dream government and the party itself used the momentum of the Ukraine war during its campaign. So the Georgian Dream, let's say, was not always highly pro-Russian and anti-Western. It started by small steps, mostly this year, by adopting those two laws that I already mentioned about the foreign influence that targets the Georgian civil society, to then proceed in an election campaign that was marked by, if I can call it, the peace narrative about the war in Ukraine, campaigning that the opposition parties are actually trying to draw Georgia into into a war, into a conflict. And therefore, it was very successfully using this narrative. And we know that Georgia, as it stands, a Black Sea country, very crucial for the transport corridors from Asia to Europe. It's very attractive to Russia's interests to have influence over not just in this part of the Black Sea, throughout the whole Black Sea region. And we know this that in Georgia, in Moldova, but also in Romania, in Bulgaria, countries that experienced elections this year, all of them, Black Sea countries, or countries from the wider Black Sea region, everywhere we saw the Russian footprint, whether it would be Russian propaganda, where it will be radical right parties adopting pro-Kremlin narratives, using very much the narrative, the peace narrative about the war in Ukraine. So we see a tendency of attempts to destabilize the democratic processes in all these countries from the wider Black Sea region. And unfortunately, Georgia has become also very important for Russia's interests in this region, because it's because of the war in Ukraine and Ukrainians' efforts and success on the military front. The Russian Black Sea Fleet was severely weakened, and therefore, right now we see that Russia is looking more to the Georgian ports, more specifically in Abkhazia. So I think that the Georgians, going back to your questions, I think the Georgians, they already felt what Russian invasion looks like with the developments in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. They know the risks of being dragged into this Russian zone of influence. They will be detached from the European integration, from the Euro-Atlantic community. And I think this is why the mobilization of the people on the streets, which, by the way, is mainly people-driven, I think this is the reason. They know the risks of not fighting for their Euro-Atlantic integration, and this is why it's so high.
All right. Maria Simeonova, head of Sofia office, European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you very much for your insight and for speaking to us here on TVP World.
Thank you very much for having me.
And with that, we conclude these World Talks, but do stay tuned to TVP World for more breaking news, updates, and commentary.